In 1862, a doctor named Thomas Holmes set up a temporary wooden shack near the battlefields of Virginia, offering to freeze time for the dead for $80 a body. By the time the American Civil War ended, Holmes had personally treated over 4,000 fallen soldiers, turning a gruesome necessity into a highly profitable industry. When Colonel Elmer Ellsworth became the first conspicuous officer to die in the conflict, Holmes embalmed his body, which was then laid in state at the White House. President Abraham Lincoln gazed upon the preserved remains of his young friend, marveling at how lifelike he appeared. 3 years later, when Lincoln himself was assassinated, his embalmed body was transported on a 19-day train journey across the nation, viewed by millions of grieving citizens. This single train journey popularized chemical preservation across the entire country, transforming how the public viewed the dignity of the deceased. Before this period, families cared for their own dead at home, washing the bodies and burying them in simple wooden boxes in local churchyards. The Civil War changed everything by professionalizing the death care industry, creating a network of commercial operators who turned grief into a transaction. For over a century, this model was virtually unchallenged, making funeral homes some of the most stable, cash-flowing businesses in any local community. But today, that model is crumbling because families are rejecting the very foundation of Holmes's preservation method in favor of something much cheaper. In 1960, less than 4% of deceased Americans were cremated. By 2023, that figure climbed to 60.6%. The momentum only accelerated as the rate reached 61.9% in 2024. By 2045, the National Funeral Directors Association projects that more than 82% of families will choose cremation over burial. This represents a massive financial crisis for local operators. The national median cost of a traditional funeral with a viewing and burial is $8,300. Once you add the cost of a cemetery plot and a concrete vault, a grieving family is looking at a bill that frequently ranges from $12,000 to $17,500. In contrast, a funeral with cremation carries a median cost of $6,280. But the real danger to the industry lies in direct cremation, which skips the embalming and the public ceremony entirely. Families can purchase direct cremation online for as little as $1,000 to $3,000. This strips away the highly profitable service fees that keep the lights on. A traditional funeral home is structured to handle a high volume of burials, meaning they are carrying massive fixed overhead that a cheap cremation simply cannot support. Grieving families are opting for simplicity, leaving funeral directors with underutilized buildings and idle vehicle fleets. Financial pressure is only one driver of this cultural shift, which also reflects a changing relationship with the physical body. For generations, the viewing of a preserved body was considered a necessary step in the grieving process. Today, families are increasingly comfortable with the idea of immediate cremation, viewing the body as a temporary vessel rather than a sacred relic that must be preserved. This shift in perspective has decimated the market for embalmers, whose specialized skills are no longer in high demand. This transition has changed the psychological relationship between the consumer and the funeral director. In the past, the funeral director was a trusted pillar of the community, coordinating a complex and solemn rite of passage. Now, many consumers view the process as a commodity transaction, searching online for the lowest price for a direct cremation. This shift has forced funeral homes to compete on price, a strategy that is unsustainable for businesses with high fixed overhead. To understand how this margin squeeze ruins a business, you have to look at the massive physical infrastructure required to care for the dead. Starting a new funeral home requires an immense amount of upfront capital, with initial setup costs ranging from $150,000 to well over $2 million. Real estate and construction represent about 40 to 50% of that startup budget. The facility must be situated in a high-traffic or easily accessible location, often requiring prime commercial zoning that commands premium prices. Inside, the layout must feature wide doorways, expansive viewing rooms, and a chapel large enough to seat dozens of guests. It is a design that feels premium, with thick carpets and heavy drapery to project a sense of quiet dignity. But the most expensive square footage in the entire building is hidden away from the public eye behind a set of double doors. This is the preparation room, where the body is chemically preserved and prepared for viewing. To comply with federal regulations, this room must be built to the standards of a minor surgical suite. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration enforces strict limits on formaldehyde exposure, capping it at 0.75 parts per million over an 8-hour workday. If a technician breathes in more than 2 parts per million during a 15-minute procedure, the business faces massive fines and immediate closure. To keep these vapors away from the embalmer's face, the room must run on a dedicated heating and cooling system that creates negative air pressure. This system must pull fresh air in and exhaust the room's air directly to the outside, achieving 12 to 15 complete air changes every single hour. No air from the preparation room can be recirculated into the public chapel or viewing offices. Installing this specialized ventilation equipment, along with backflow preventers, biohazard waste tanks, and industrial refrigeration units, adds $100,000 to the build-out cost. Even the embalming tables must be custom ordered in heavy stainless steel to withstand constant chemical washing. The plumbing must include specialized backflow preventers to ensure that bodily fluids and chemicals do not contaminate the municipal water supply. Municipal inspectors routinely test these systems, and any violation can result in immediate suspension of the facility's operating license. Refrigeration is another massive expense, as a funeral home must be able to store multiple bodies at a constant temperature of 38 degrees Fahrenheit. A walk-in cooler capable of holding 6 trays costs between $10,000 and $20,000 to purchase and install. Zoning laws represent another massive hurdle for new operators, as local residents rarely want a funeral home or a crematory in their backyard. Attending city council meetings and fighting zoning battles can delay a project for years, draining capital before construction even begins. If the facility includes a crematory, the environmental permitting process is even more rigorous. State agencies require extensive testing of emissions to ensure the burners do not release mercury or other toxins into the surrounding air. Once the building is compliant, the owner must turn their attention to the driveway. A funeral home cannot operate without a specialized fleet of vehicles. The centerpiece of this fleet is the hearse, a vehicle that must project flawless professionalism. A new coach-built hearse, handcrafted on a Cadillac or Lincoln chassis, carries a retail price tag of $70,000 to $150,000. Some custom upfits can push that cost past $300,000. Because these vehicles are so expensive, many owners turn to specialized lenders who finance funeral coaches over 5 to 7 year terms. Others lease the vehicles to keep their monthly payments manageable. But this adds a permanent monthly line item to their overhead before they have even opened for business. In addition to the hearse, a funeral home requires a first call van, which is a discreetly modified utility vehicle used to transport bodies from the place of death. These vans cost around $40,000 to $50,000, and they must be equipped with custom stretcher mounts and privacy screens. A service car, often a premium sedan or sport utility vehicle, is also needed for flower transport and administrative trips, costing another $35,000. This high fixed debt means that a new operator must secure a steady stream of high-margin clients just to cover their monthly loan payment. In smaller towns, a single family-owned funeral home might only handle 50 to 60 cases a year, making every single burial critical to the survival of the business. If they lose even a few cases to a low-cost cremation competitor, the debt on the hearse and the building can quickly drag the entire operation into bankruptcy. But the physical building and vehicles are just the beginning of the financial drain. Beyond the initial startup debt, the daily cost of keeping a funeral home open is incredibly high. The largest recurring expense is labor, which is complicated by the unpredictable nature of death. A funeral home must be ready to respond to a call at any hour of the day or night. This means paying staff to be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, including holidays. When a local hospital or nursing home calls at 2 a.m. to report a passing, a team must be dispatched immediately. These night removals require 2 technicians, a dedicated removal vehicle, specialized transport stretchers, and overtime wages. A licensed funeral director commands an average annual salary of $65,000, and busy locations require multiple directors to manage the paperwork and services. The administrative burden is heavy, as every death requires filing death certificates and securing burial permits. In addition to labor, maintaining physical inventory drains cash flow. A traditional showroom displays 10 to 15 caskets, representing a significant upfront investment. Wholesale prices for standard 18-gauge steel caskets range from $600 to $1,500 each. Solid hardwood options like mahogany or cherry can cost the operator over $3,000 wholesale. This means a funeral home easily has $20,000 to $40,000 tied up in physical inventory sitting on the showroom floor. Even the chemicals used in the preparation room are a specialized expense. Standard formaldehyde arterial fluids cost around $100 per case of 24 bottles. Specialized chemical fluids and restorative compounds add to the cost of every single procedure. State regulatory boards charge annual licensing fees for both the facility and each individual director on staff. These compliance fees, coupled with mandatory continuing education credits, add thousands of dollars to the annual operating budget. Waste disposal is another ongoing operational expense, as all biohazard materials must be collected and incinerated by specialized waste management companies. Marketing is another significant expense, as funeral homes must constantly maintain a presence in the local community through newspaper obituaries and digital advertisements. Unlike a standard retail business, a funeral home cannot run promotional sales or discounts without appearing predatory or desperate. They must build relationships with local hospitals, hospice care facilities, local clergymen, and regional medical examiners to ensure their name is passed along to grieving families. This relationship building requires constant networking and community involvement, which takes up valuable time and resources. For operators who choose to run their own crematory, fuel costs present a highly volatile expense. A single cremation retort chamber requires an enormous amount of natural gas or propane to reach temperatures of 1,400 to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. This process takes about 2 hours and consumes roughly 25 therms of natural gas, which can cost anywhere from $20 to $50 per cremation depending on local utility rates. The retort itself requires regular maintenance, including rebricking the refractory lining every few hundred cycles, which costs around $10,000. If the lining fails, the chamber must be shut down, forcing the operator to pay a competitor to handle their cremation. On top of equipment maintenance, liability insurance for death care facilities is exceptionally costly. Funeral homes must carry specialized professional liability policies to protect against lawsuits involving body identification errors and negligent embalming. These policies can cost several $1,000s a year, and a single public scandal can destroy the reputation of a family business that took 3 generations to build. To survive these crushing operating costs, the business must generate high revenues on every service, which is why their pricing model is so heavily scrutinized. To offset these heavy overhead costs, funeral homes rely on a carefully structured pricing model regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. Under the Federal Funeral Rule of 1984, operators must provide customers with a fully itemized general price list. The core of this price list is the basic services fee, which is the only charge that families are legally required to pay. This fee covers the funeral director's professional time and licensing overhead, averaging around $2,300 across the United States. Every other service is priced separately, allowing families to select only what they want. Embalming is typically priced at $800, while the use of the chapel for a ceremony adds another $500 to $800. Staff services for a graveside ceremony average around $400, and the transfer of remains to the funeral home adds another $350. Viewing room rental is typically billed at $450 per day, allowing the funeral home to monetize its high-value real estate. But the real profits have historically been made on merchandise markup. A standard 18-gauge metal casket that costs the funeral home $800 wholesale is routinely listed for $2,500 to $4,000. This represents a markup of 300 to 500%. Wood caskets, especially premium hardwoods like mahogany, can be marked up even higher, turning a single sale into thousands of dollars of gross profit. Cemeteries also require an outer burial container or vault to protect the casket and prevent the soil above from collapsing. A basic concrete grave liner costs the funeral home about $300 wholesale, but they sell it to the family for $900 to $1,500. Under the federal rule, a family can purchase a casket from a third-party retailer like Walmart or Costco and have it shipped directly to the funeral home. The funeral home is legally forbidden from charging a handling fee or refusing to accept the casket, which completely strips away their most profitable merchandise sale. This legal protection forces funeral directors to shift their profit centers from physical products to professional service fees, driving up the basic service fee to keep the business viable. For families choosing cremation, the revenue matrix changes dramatically. A direct cremation has a low entry price, but smart operators find ways to recoup the lost burial revenue. They sell decorative urns, which cost $30 wholesale but retail for $200. Some homes offer witness cremation packages where families pay an extra $300 to $500 to watch the casket enter the retort. Others charge for the temporary use of a rental casket, which is a specially designed wooden shell with a cardboard insert used for the viewing before the cremation takes place. This allows the funeral home to sell the same wooden casket shell multiple times, generating high-margin rental fees on a single asset. Even the pricing of cremation itself is subject to intense competition. Independent operators face pressure from low-cost, high-volume cremation societies that operate out of warehouse districts, bypassing the need for expensive retail storefronts. These discount providers can offer cremation services for under $1,000, forcing traditional funeral homes to either lower their prices or justify their higher cost. To compete, traditional operators must emphasize the value of their chapel spaces and personal services, attempting to turn a simple cremation into an event. Pre-need contracts, where individuals pay for their funerals years before their death, provide another critical source of cash flow. These funds are placed in state-regulated trusts or specialized insurance policies, allowing the funeral home to secure future business. However, if the rate of inflation outpaces the growth of the trust, the funeral home must still honor the contract, potentially losing money on a service planned 20 years prior. Despite these strategies, the steady decline in traditional burials has forced many independent homes to consolidate. This constant consolidation has allowed corporate giants to quietly buy up family-owned homes in almost every major city. The local name on the sign remains the same, but the checks are written to a corporate headquarters in Houston, Texas. Service Corporation International operates over 1,500 funeral homes and 400 cemeteries across North America, controlling a massive market share. By centralizing their embalming facilities, vehicle fleets, purchasing power, and administrative staff, They can achieve economies of scale that no independent family home can match. They can route bodies from multiple locations to a single prep facility, reducing their labor and compliance costs significantly. This corporate efficiency allows them to maintain EBITDA margins of 20 to 30%, even as cremation rates rise. For an independent operator, the business is no longer a simple matter of community prestige and steady margin. Maintaining a net profit margin of 10 to 15% now requires rigorous cost control and high volume. If a funeral home handles fewer than 60 calls a year, the fixed costs of real estate and vehicle debt will slowly eat the business alive. But for those who can survive the transition to cremation, the industry remains incredibly stable. Death care is a market with zero customer churn and guaranteed demand. Yet, as the cremation rate climbs toward the projected 82% mark, the days of the high-margin casket sale are coming to an end. Families are increasingly walking away from the traditional chapel, choosing instead to scatter ashes in private ceremonies far from the funeral home. The local funeral home will survive, but it will look more like a crematorium logistics center than the grand chapels of the past. And that corporate office in Houston will continue to collect its thousands of dollars per service, one family at a time, while the old family signs on the lawns slowly fade. The wooden battle shacks of Virginia are long gone, replaced by corporate boardrooms and digital price lists. But the fundamental drive to commercialize the final exit remains, transferring wealth from grieving hands to silent spreadsheets.